What if one of the most powerful men in history started as a quiet boy, disliked by his classmates and far from the heart of Europe? Napoleon Bonaparte, the man who would one day rule most of the continent, began his journey on a small island few people paid attention to. He was born in 1769 on the rugged island of Corsica, just months after it had been taken by France from the Republic of Genoa. This alone shaped his early identity. He was French by law, but Corsican by heart. His father, Carlo Bonaparte, was a lawyer and a minor nobleman who tried to secure a better future for his children. His mother, Letizia, was strong, strict, and deeply respected in their community. Napoleon was the second of 8 children, and from a young age he was different. He was serious, intense, and always thinking. Unlike many children who enjoyed play and noise, Napoleon loved books and silence. He would often sit alone, reading about ancient empires, military leaders, and history. He was especially fascinated by men like Julius Caesar and Alexander the Great. These names were more than heroes to him. They were examples of what was possible. His father saw the potential in Napoleon early on and worked hard to send him to school in France. So at the age of 9, Napoleon left Corsica and traveled to mainland France, beginning his formal education far from home. The journey was more than physical. It was emotional and cultural. In France, he was not treated as an equal. His Corsican accent, poor French, and proud attitude made him an outsider. Other boys teased him, laughed at his strange way of speaking, and called him names. But Napoleon didn't fight back with words. Instead, he worked harder. He spent hours reading, studying, and improving his French. He didn't have many friends, but he had ambition, and for him, that was enough. He wrote letters home, sometimes filled with anger, sometimes with loneliness. But even in those early letters, one thing was clear: he wanted more. He didn't want to return to Corsica and live a quiet life. He wanted to become someone great. At 15, he was accepted into a military academy in Paris. This was a turning point. There, Napoleon learned about artillery, tactics, and strategy, all the tools of war. He also learned how to lead men, how to think under pressure, and how to turn ideas into action. Although he was still quiet and reserved, his teachers noticed something special. He had a sharp mind, a hunger for learning, and a deep understanding of military theory. More importantly, he had imagination. Where others saw rules, Napoleon saw possibilities. He began to believe that a good commander followed the map, but a great one could rewrite it. Outside the classroom, France was changing fast. The old monarchy was under pressure, and the ideas of revolution were growing louder. By the time Napoleon finished school, the French Revolution had begun. It was a time of chaos, but also a time of opportunity. Young men like Napoleon, without money or powerful families, could rise if they were smart and bold. And Napoleon was both. He returned to Corsica for a short time, hoping to help his island break free from French control. But things did not go as planned. Local leaders rejected him. He had arguments with family friends and even became a target. Eventually, he had to flee Corsica with his family, leaving behind the land he once wanted to defend. Now he was truly French by choice, not just by law. With nowhere else to go, Napoleon threw himself into the army. He was still young, still unknown, but something inside him had changed. He was no longer the lonely boy at school. He was a man with fire in his heart and a vision in his mind. In the army, he worked hard to stand out. He read military books in his free time, practiced maneuvers, and watched every commander he served under. He asked questions, took notes, and always looked for a better way to do things. He didn't care about medals or uniforms. He cared about ideas and results. The French army at the time was in disarray. Many officers had been removed or killed during the Revolution. This created space for young, talented men to rise quickly. Napoleon was ready. He didn't need luck. He had preparation. And soon, the world would see what a boy from Corsica could become. France was a nation in chaos, and the revolution had opened doors for those bold enough to walk through them. Napoleon was quick to seize the opportunity, and his timing could not have been better. In 1793, a critical moment arrived. The port city of Toulon had been taken by royalist forces who opposed the revolution and were supported by the British Navy. The French government needed a leader to help retake the city. Though he was still a junior officer, Napoleon volunteered. He studied the situation with careful eyes, analyzing the terrain, artillery positions, and weaknesses of the enemy. Then he offered a detailed plan, one that more experienced generals had failed to suggest. The plan was accepted, and Napoleon was placed in charge of the artillery. With precise movements and clever positioning, he led the attack. Toulon was retaken. The victory was a turning point in Napoleon's career. He was promoted to brigadier general at just 24 years old. It was a fast rise, but it was earned. His courage, intelligence, and ability to act under pressure caught the attention of powerful leaders in Paris. And people were beginning to say his name with admiration and sometimes fear. Napoleon did not rest. In 1795, another crisis hit Paris when royalists staged an uprising. The government turned to Napoleon for help again. He responded with brutal efficiency. With a famous order, "Give them a whiff of grape shot," he ordered artillery to fire on the mob. The uprising was crushed within hours. It was a hard move, but it worked. The city was calm and the government was saved. For this, Napoleon was rewarded again. He became commander of the Army of the Interior and soon married Joséphine de Beauharnais, a widow with powerful connections. Though many questioned the match, Napoleon was deeply in love. He wrote her passionate letters, sometimes while on campaign. Joséphine brought him social status, and he gave her loyalty, at least in the beginning. But while their personal life was full of emotion, Napoleon's focus stayed on military goals. In 1796, he was given command of the French army of Italy. It was considered a weak force with poor supplies and low morale, but Napoleon transformed it. With speed, surprise, and strategy, he led a brilliant campaign against the Austrian forces. In battle after battle, he defeated armies larger than his own. He marched across Italy like a storm. His soldiers began to believe in him completely. They called him the Little Corporal, a term of respect for someone who rose through the ranks. He inspired loyalty not by shouting orders, but by leading from the front. He ate what his men ate, walked where they walked, and showed no fear. The campaign brought both glory and political power. France gained new territories, and Napoleon gained more fame than ever. But not everyone was happy about it. Some in Paris feared he was becoming too popular, too powerful. So when Napoleon returned from Italy, he was sent on another mission, this time to Egypt. The plan was to strike at British trade routes and expand French influence. The Egyptian campaign began with success. He won the Battle of the Pyramids and entered Cairo like a conqueror, but trouble soon followed. The British Navy, led by Admiral Nelson, destroyed the French fleet at the Battle of the Nile. Napoleon and his army were trapped. Supplies were low, disease was spreading, and morale began to fall. Still, Napoleon refused to give up. He kept the army organized and tried to build support among the local people. He even showed interest in science, bringing scholars with him to study the ancient Egyptian world. But back in France, the situation was changing. The government was weak, unpopular, and desperate for a strong hand. Napoleon sensed another opportunity. In 1799, he left his army in Egypt and secretly returned to France. He arrived as a hero once again. Soon, he led a coup d'état, a takeover of the government. With the help of allies, he dissolved the ruling council and formed a new government. He called it the Consulate, and he placed himself at the top as first consul. France now had a new leader, one who was not born into power but had taken it through action. Napoleon was only 30 years old, but already he was shaping the future of Europe. He had risen from an outsider in Corsica to the center of world affairs, and yet he was just getting started. France was tired of instability, and Napoleon promised order. As first consul, he moved quickly to fix the chaos left by the revolution. He brought back calm to the streets, restructured the legal system, and focused on education. He created the Napoleonic Code, a new set of laws that simplified legal processes and promoted equality under the law. This code would become one of his most lasting legacies. Even today, parts of it influence legal systems around the world. He rebuilt France's economy, created a national bank, and improved tax collection. Everything he touched seemed to grow stronger, faster, and more efficient. To many, he looked like a savior. The people supported him not just because he brought peace, but because he gave them pride in their nation again. But peace was short-lived. Across Europe, kings and queens feared Napoleon's power. They worried that the revolutionary ideas from France might spread to their own countries. So they formed new coalitions and prepared for war. Napoleon didn't wait to be attacked. He moved first. In 1800, he crossed the Alps with his army and defeated the Austrians at the Battle of Marengo. The victory secured France's control over much of Italy again. His popularity soared. 2 years later, in 1802, the people voted to make him first consul for life. But for Napoleon, even that wasn't enough. In 1804, he took the final step. He declared himself Emperor of the French. In a grand ceremony at Notre Dame Cathedral, he placed the crown on his own head. It was a bold message to the world. His power came not from tradition, but from action. The revolution had overthrown a king, and now a soldier had taken the throne. As emperor, he continued to reshape Europe. He defeated Austria and Russia at the Battle of Austerlitz, one of his greatest victories. His army was strong, loyal, and expertly led. His military strategies were studied by other nations and feared. Napoleon redrew the map of Europe. He dissolved the Holy Roman Empire and replaced it with the Confederation of the Rhine. He placed family members and loyal generals on the thrones of conquered lands. His brother became King of Spain. Another ruled Naples. It looked like no one could stop him. His empire stretched from France deep into Central Europe. At home, he continued to invest in schools, roads, and science. He was both a warrior and a builder. But the higher he rose, the more enemies he made, and not just on battlefields. Some people in France began to question his growing control. They saw signs of a new kind of monarchy, one dressed in the clothes of revolution, but holding all the same power. Still, most remained loyal. After years of war and chaos, they believed in strength more than promises. Napoleon's ambitions grew larger. He wanted more than land, he wanted to shape the future. He divorced Josephine in 1810 because she could not give him a child. He married Marie-Louise of Austria, uniting France with one of its old enemies. Their son, born in 1811, was named King of Rome. Napoleon believed he had secured a dynasty. But beneath the surface, tensions were rising. Resistance was growing in Spain, and nationalism was awakening in the countries he had conquered. Some of his allies were only loyal by fear, not love. And in Russia, a new challenge was taking shape, one that would soon test everything Napoleon had built. In 1812, Napoleon made one of the most ambitious and disastrous decisions of his life. He launched an invasion of Russia with an army of over 600,000 men. He believed that a quick and powerful campaign would force Tsar Alexander I to submit. But Russia was vast, cold, and unpredictable. The Russian army avoided direct battles. Instead, they retreated slowly and burned everything behind them: villages, crops, and supplies. Napoleon's army advanced deeper into the country but found no food, no shelter, and no easy victory. When they finally reached Moscow, the city was almost empty. Soon after, fires broke out and much of the city was destroyed. Napoleon had expected a peace offer, but none came. He waited for weeks. Winter approached, and his army was already suffering. With no supplies and freezing temperatures, Napoleon had no choice. He ordered a retreat. What followed was one of the worst disasters in military history. Starvation, disease, and the brutal cold killed tens of thousands. Russian soldiers attacked from all sides. Horses died in the snow. Soldiers froze where they stood. By the time the army returned to France, less than one-fifth had survived. The Grand Army was broken, and so was Napoleon's image of invincibility. Europe saw a chance. Nations that once feared Napoleon now united against him. Prussia, Austria, Russia, and Britain formed a powerful alliance. They attacked from all directions. Napoleon tried to rebuild his forces. He won battles, but the numbers were no longer on his side. In 1814, coalition forces entered Paris. For the first time, the enemy was inside the French capital. Napoleon was forced to abdicate to give up his throne. He was sent into exile on the small island of Elba off the coast of Italy. The man who had ruled almost all of Europe now ruled an island of only a few thousand people. Still, he did not give up. On Elba, he studied, planned, and waited. Less than a year later, he escaped. He returned to France and marched toward Paris. Soldiers were sent to stop him, but many joined him instead. As he walked, the crowds grew larger. People still remembered his strength and leadership. He promised peace, stability, and a new future. Within weeks, he had returned to power. This period became known as the 100 Days. Once again, Napoleon was Emperor of France, but the rest of Europe did not sit still. The Allies formed a new army to stop him. The final confrontation came at a small village in Belgium, Waterloo. On June 18, 1815, Napoleon faced British and Prussian forces in one of the most famous battles in history. The fighting was fierce. Napoleon's strategy was bold. But this time, it was not enough. The British, led by the Duke of Wellington, held their position. Late in the day, the Prussians arrived and tipped the balance. Napoleon's army was defeated. His dreams of empire were crushed. He fled the battlefield and returned to Paris, but support had faded. The French government demanded he step down again. He did, this time for good. He hoped to escape to America, but the British captured him. They sent him far away, to the island of St. Helena in the South Atlantic. There, surrounded by the sea and watched by guards, Napoleon lived out his final years. He spent his time writing, reflecting, and telling his version of events. He still believed in his legacy. He died in 1821 at the age of 51, far from home, far from power, but never forgotten. Even in exile, he remained a figure of fascination, a man who rose from nothing to nearly rule the world. And while his empire was gone, his impact on history had only begun. After his defeat at Waterloo and exile to St. Helena, Napoleon's physical power vanished, but his influence only grew. Far from Europe, he became a symbol of ambition, of genius, and of the thin line between glory and downfall. St. Helena was remote, windswept, and lonely. He lived in a modest house called Longwood under constant guard from the British. He was no longer emperor, no longer in command, but he still held the attention of the world. Visitors weren't allowed and letters were censored. Napoleon spent much of his time reading, writing, and speaking with a few trusted companions. He walked through the island's rough landscape each day, thinking about the battles he'd won, the allies he'd lost, and the decisions that had shaped Europe. He often dictated his memories to his aides, trying to control how history would remember him. He saw himself as a man who had tried to bring order, justice, and greatness to a broken continent. To him, his wars had been necessary, his rule had been fair, and his intentions noble. Whether people agreed or not, his story was impossible to ignore. In France, even those who once opposed him began to speak of him with respect. His image was found in homes and shops, paintings, statues, and songs kept his legend alive. Even children in schools learned about his victories. The name Napoleon stirred emotion, pride for some, fear for others, curiosity for all. While he aged quickly on St. Helena, his legend grew stronger. Illness eventually took over his body, though he rarely complained. He died on May 5, 1821, at the age of 51. His last words, reportedly, were about France, the army, and Josephine. The world reacted with a mix of sorrow and relief. For some, the nightmare was over. For others, a great light had gone out. Years later, in 1840, his remains were brought back to France. His tomb lies in Les Invalides in Paris, a grand monument for a man who had once shaken the world. But Napoleon's story didn't end with his death. Debates continued. Was he a hero or a tyrant? A liberator or a conqueror? Historians filled shelves with books about his life. Writers turned him into myth, and politicians studied his rise and fall. What made Napoleon different was not just his victories, but the force of his will. He had believed he could change the world, and for a time he had. He inspired people to think big, to act boldly, and to challenge what seemed impossible. His laws, his reforms, and his legend outlived him. Even today, leaders quote him. Generals study his strategies. His life remains one of the most dramatic stories ever told. He was both a product and a shaper of his time. Born during a turbulent age, he became its most unforgettable character. From a small island to the height of empire, and finally to exile, Napoleon's life reminds us how fast greatness can rise, and how quickly it can fall. He changed the way nations viewed power, war, and leadership, and his impact still echoes through the world we live in today. To truly understand Napoleon, we must look beyond the battles and titles. His story is one of ambition shaped by adversity, vision sharpened by struggle, and a legacy carved not only in maps, but in minds. Born on a small island with no power, he refused to accept his place. He used education, discipline, and relentless will to climb through the ranks. He rose faster than anyone expected. From student to soldier, from general to emperor, his life was a race against history. And in many ways, he won. He brought reform to laws, reshaped national borders, and redefined the idea of leadership. He ruled with order, but not always mercy. He gave people pride, but at the cost of many lives. He didn't just change France, he changed Europe. Old systems fell. New ideas took root. He inspired both fear and admiration. And even in defeat, he forced others to rise higher just to face him. But Napoleon was not a god, not a myth, not a perfect man. He was human, full of contradiction. He was brilliant but proud, bold but stubborn, a visionary who sometimes refused to see danger ahead. His downfall came not from weakness but from reaching too far. He tried to control what could not be controlled, the hearts of all people, the will of all nations. And yet that desire to build, to lead, to leave a mark is why his story still matters. We see parts of him in every leader who dreams big, in every person who refuses to give up, in every soul that rises after falling. His story teaches us that greatness is not given. It's earned, tested, and sometimes taken away. But its echo can last forever. Napoleon's life reminds us that history is not just about what happened. It's about what we choose to remember, and how we use those memories to shape the future. Thank you for watching the story of Napoleon Bonaparte. From a small island in the Mediterranean to the grandest palaces of Europe, his journey was nothing short of extraordinary. He rose through discipline, strategy, and vision, and left behind a legacy still studied today. Whether you see him as a hero or a cautionary tale, there's no denying his impact on the world. History is not just names and dates. It's made of choices, challenges, and dreams. Napoleon's life is a reminder that ambition, when paired with courage and action, can shape the course of nations. If this story inspired you, or if you learned something new, we invite you to subscribe and join us for more stories like this. Tell us in the comments, what surprised you the most about Napoleon's journey, and which leader's story should we explore next? Until then, keep learning, keep questioning, and remember, history lives through the stories we tell. See you in the next one.